Hi, Kerry. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited. As I mentioned to you earlier, I've been following you for a while. You're a great book blogger and you're an editor of a great site called 49th Shelf. And I've been wanting to meet you. So here we go.
I'm excited. Thank you.
So what we're going to do first, we're going to start. You've written a book, which we're going to talk about, and then we're going to talk a bit about what you do, and then I want to conclude, which is going to be fun, with some holiday gift giving ideas. And you've got some quite creative choices. So, but
Yeah,
let's just dive into it. The first thing I wanted to ask you, your book "Asking for a Friend" is about intense female friendship, and I just wanted to ask. I'm sure you must have drawn or not drawn upon your own experience, and I just want to know, what is your own experience with female friendship, and how does that compare to the friendship that we see with the main characters, Clara and Jess?
I have been really fortunate to have lots of wonderful friends throughout my life, female friends mostly. I have a few male friends, but um, it's always been women that I've been able to have these intense connections with, and I've been fascinated by the way that the women who've known me for decades, we've been able to build a history together, and that our relationships are some of the most complicated and rich of my life. I think my marriage, it's pretty straightforward, and it's more stable than thank goodness, than the friendships that I've had, which have really weathered ups and downs. But partly that's because we've grown up together, and become together. Started off being one kind of person, and have grown and changed so much. Um, I don't just have one best friend. I have many very good friends. I think the book is dedicated, there's six friends that the book is dedicated to, who are friends who've been close to me since high school, and then the other group, the other three, since university. And so they've seen me at my most ridiculous, and I know things about them that I would never tell. And those friendships are so special to me. They have made me who I am. And I'm just so interested in them and in the complicated dynamics of a friend. Because when I look at my female friends, it's almost like looking at a mirror in a way. I'm not looking at me, but the ways in which they're like me is like a mirror. And then the ways in which they're not makes me think about myself too. And that's just really complicated, and sometimes hard. And so I wanted to explore that in my book, but I also also wanted to really explore the how astonished I am by having had people who've known me since I was 13, and who still know me now and possibly know me better than anyone.
I remember when I was pregnant with my second child, I called a friend before I told my husband. But I've never said that before, but I said, don't tell. But I just thought that she might be even more excited. I mean, I don't know why I did that, but
Well, that's a major point in the book, right? The first line of the book is that every time Jess was pregnant, Clara was the first to know.
yes.
And so I'm sure you you could relate to that. Um, yeah, it seems a little bit unfair to these poor fathers who get left out of the mix, but there's something also really complicated and sometimes fraught but wonderful about going through pregnancies together too. And um and so I wanted to explore that as well, and the way that maternal experiences really can connect women and also drive them apart.
So can you give everyone a brief summary of the book?
Yeah, it starts in the fall of 1998 at a university residence in Toronto. It's identifiable, though not called out exactly. And Jess is a first year student. She's a little bit out of her depth. She hasn't found her people. She's lost, and she's also in trouble. And the person who's there for her is a a classmate, someone who lives on her floor. She's a little bit older, a little bit aloof, and that is Clara. And when Jess is desperate because she's found out that she is pregnant, Clara is the person who sort of finds her, and they come together, and they're both a little bit lost in this place, and they sort of come to mean home for each other. And they live together for the next couple of years, and their lives are very embedded. And then life happens and they come apart. And I guess the question of the book is can these intense connections, so based in a time and a place, be sustained? Does it even make sense to insist on being connected to these people who knew you when you're were someone who you're not anymore? Can friendships grow and change? Because not all of them can. You know, you asked about my own friendships. I talked about the ones that have grown and sustained through the years, but there are others that haven't, and it breaks my heart a bit. And so the book hinges on the question of what lasts and what survives, and it takes them through the next 20 years of their very divergent lives, as they grow together and come apart, and back and forth along that trajectory.
This is something I was grappling with as I was reading the book, and you kind of touched on it, but is their friendship healthy? I mean, you know, it's interesting because if there's a friendship of any depth at all, you're going to have problems. But there's points in this book where I'm like, I don't know about this friendship. And then there's times where so I just want to know what you think of their friendship.
Well, other people have responded to the book that way, like 1 star on Goodreads, this friendship is toxic. And I was so surprised by that reaction. This is my 3rd novel, and I've been surprised by the really vehement dislike that people have toward what I've written. Not that it exists, but just I always like to worry in advance about all the reasons people don't like it, and then it ends up being ways that I hadn't supposed. And so and I know that people, talking about the friendship is unhealthy or toxic, that doesn't mean they don't like the book, but I never thought about it.
Oh, you didn't think of it like that.
I
Maybe
didn't.
See it as a real friendship.
Well, then that response has made me think, oh my gosh, what kind of a person am I? Just to think that this is just what happens. It's normal. I've really always struggled in my connections with other women with judgment, and not letting other people's choices be a statement upon my own if they're different. And so I really wanted to grapple with that tension in the book, because it's something that's so interesting to me. It's uncomfortable and terrible, to feel that way, to look at a friend who's making a choice and not be sure how I feel about it. And is it because it's a bad choice, or why do my friends' choices make me uncomfortable? Now that I'm 44, it comes up less, but in my 20s, when I wasn't sure of myself and our lives were changing all the time, it was a lot of tumultuousness. And so I wanted to write about that. So yeah, maybe it's a little heavy on the tension, and there need to be, in the background of the book, I'm sure there are easygoing times happening between Clara and Jess. We do see them when things are most fraught and tense, because I guess that's really what interested me. Sometimes I think their friendship isn't healthy. Sometimes it's based in real neediness, and or they're unable to look beyond their own situations to know how to be a better friend at that moment in time. So I don't know. For me, it seems like it's a fairly normal relationship. But yeah, maybe I've upped the tension a lot. But you got to sustain a book, right?
Yeah, it can't be. They can't get along the whole time. It's impossible.
Yeah,
That wouldn't
but
be.
yeah, I do. For me, and maybe I've also just made my characters really introspective and asking questions, and how they treat each other. I don't think is so terrible in the end. I think it's a pretty healthy friendship. They make each other, they build each other into the people that they are, and I think that's kind of awesome.
It's interesting because I'm 10 years older than you, and I don't
Does
have
it get hard again?
No, it gets easier.
That's what I'm
So
hoping.
like it's just interesting that you're saying that because I think about all the people that surround me now. And I mean, I'm not saying there's never a problem, but there's really no problems in your 50s in a there you just don't get caught up in the little details anymore. And
Yeah,
you don't hang out with people that don't make you feel awesome. I don't know. That's what I think.
that's what
But
I've been feeling too, for
and it
sure.
just gets better and better that way. But that's my
No,
experience.
I think you're right. And I think there's something specific about going through friendships in your 20s and 30s as relationship choices happen and people make, people like they start out, Clara and Jess, living in the same university residence, and then they end up living in really different socioeconomic classes, and that can make things complicated. And like, what if partners don't like each other? What if your friend has children that are really obnoxious? Like, all of these things that can make those very ever-changing years so bumpy. And then yeah, I feel like Jess and Clara are going to have, the book ends um on a note where I feel like maybe there'll be a little bit of peace for a while and they can float blissfully for a time.
So, as I'm reading this book, I can't help but start thinking about the book, My Brilliant Friend. And of course, halfway through, you reference it. So, you were obviously in some way thinking about it. I also have to admit, I'm going to admit here on the podcast, I haven't read that book, but I've been wanting to. And I know it's really important to a lot of people. And so, what's your opinion on that book and how did that influence this book?
I've been waiting to get in trouble about this. I think it's the most controversial point in my book. I did not like Elena Ferrante's series. It was
Oh.
very hyped. I read them all, but I I wasn't swept away. Like, I was just, why does this book have to be so long? And why are there three more of them? And I don't know. I was not captivated. They were so dense, and everything that happened to the characters was so terrible. And I just wasn't, it didn't do it for me. And I really like, I'm a book reviewer, but I also ardently believe that it all comes down to taste. I don't think it's a bad book. It just, I didn't like it. And yes, you're right. It's so important to people. And so I'm not saying the book isn't good, but it, I wanted a book about friendship, and My Brilliant Friend just wasn't it for me. And I wanted a different kind of ending. I think I referenced that in my novel. So yes, in my book, that book comes up. It is something that brings these two characters together again. But it's not my favorite book.
Okay, good to know. I wanted to ask you about the role that fairy tales play in the book. And I loved fairy tales as a kid. I was kind of obsessed with them. So I like that kind of through line in the book. And what's going on there?
I wasn't so obsessed with fairy tales as a kid, but I became obsessed with them when I had children and just started seeing how weird they were and how dark and fascinating. So I got really into them and into like reading a bit of scholarship about them, and the way that they're just this backdrop to like Western culture that people don't really question. Um, and if you start to question it, and if you start to read some of the darker, more original versions, not the ones that have been watered down for children, it explains a lot about who we are. Because yeah, they're dark and twisted and violent, um, but also there aren't a lot of women in them, and the women who are in them, I mean, I guess the whole point of them, and it's archetypes rather than the deep, fully rendered literary creatures. But I was also really interested in, so the ways that fairy tales have sort of informed us and our culture without us even thinking about it, because it's there and we never ask questions. I was also really interested in the way that the same images, um, and motifs turn up in cultures all over the world. And stories of like foundlings and
Mm.
um they turn up everywhere, and I think they maybe tell us something about human um preoccupations and neuroses. Also thinking about motherhood and fairy tales and all the evil stepmothers in fairy tales that um actually weren't stepmothers in the original forms, but whoever sanitized them for us found it unpalatable to think that mothers could have such nasty thoughts about their children that, like in Hansel and Gretel, you would take them out into the woods and leave them there. But then when I had a child and was really overwhelmed, I was like, that actually makes a great deal of sense. I could think about the impulse to do that. um I think, yeah, it tells us something about the darkest parts of ourselves, but also fairy tales, but also about the things that are unquestioned. When you think deeply about fairy tales, there's so much there that's interesting. Like in the story of Rapunzel, which I talk about in the book. It's not quite what you think it is. And so I guess I had Jess be studying fairy tales in school in the beginning. And then I sort of had to think of a job for her. And she ended up working in a library that is based on a real library here in Toronto. It's called the Osborne Collection for Early Children's Books. And it's has first editions and incredible children's books, including folk tales and fairy tales. And so she becomes a librarian at this library. And so it becomes sort of her life. And so it's a backdrop of the book. And it also just gives my character something to do.
Okay. Okay, another quick question I have is, we've sort of touched on this a little bit, but why do you think when platonic female friendships fall apart or go through troubles, it can sometimes cut even deeper than a love relationship? And if I was just curious what your thoughts, I have my own opinions on that, but I want to know what you thought.
I think there are such scripts for romantic relationships, for how they proceed, how they break up. There's whole rituals in our society about it. Once I bought a tiny tub of ice cream at the store, and my children saw it and they said, "Oh, that's emotional support ice cream," because they've seen the heartbroken women on television eating Haagen-Dazs.
Ah,
So we know how to navigate whatever happens in romantic relationships because it's so scripted in our culture. But I think friendship, it isn't. And there's a point where Jess goes to the bookstore, and there's really, she can find all kinds of books about divorce, but nothing about losing your best friend. I think there are a few books out there now, but there's not a whole section in the bookstore, certainly, and that's something that happens to almost everybody. So yeah, how do you navigate that terrain? I think a person's very alone when they're doing it. There aren't a lot of best friend breakup support groups, and also it's so personal when the person who, I speaking from experience, the friendships that have ended for me with people who I feel like knew me so well, it's devastating that then that person's like, well, no, this isn't working for me, and that relationship ends. It's such a thorough rejection. And yeah, I have relationships that it's been 20 years and I still think about it all the time. And also when people are really embedded in your most formative experiences,
mm.
um, I would have a longing for those people still to be with me so I can remember with them, and to make those experiences, I don't know, to bring them to life a little bit. And so when the people who are part of those experiences are lost, it really underlines how far away the past is. What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are really the same. And that, I think, just, kind of back to that comment about telling a friend that I was pregnant before my husband. I just found in my marriage, he didn't get as excited about the little baby details that maybe a
Yeah.
friend would. He would be excited about, significant life moments, but I might tell a 10-minute story about something I did that day. He doesn't want to hear that. but maybe a friend does. So in ways, I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way, that you say it's sort of a kind of a rejection of your full self when you maybe when you have a friendship breakup. And that might be true because you share so much and then it doesn't work out. Maybe you worry it's about you. I'm not really sure, but I just think you can get quite close to
Yeah. And I think
someone.
about I never would think about my partner as a reflection of myself. I mean, maybe like,
Mm,
but my friends are, and
yes.
vice versa. So yeah, it gets very complicated.
Do you have a reading that you can do? I was wondering if you have anything you could share with everybody to give a little flavor of the book.
I would love to. This is so 1998 on a university campus was very much the place where I was. And a lot of the early parts of the story, the people are not from my life, but the places and the things that happened are. The book is a little bit like a museum of the things that I want to kind of crystallize and keep with me. And so this was based on a real experience from someone who is not close to me anymore.
Oh,
Um, and it's funny because I know she's read my books. So sometimes I feel like I'm just sending her secret messages. So this is Clara and Jess. They've become quite good friends. They've been friends through it's almost they became friends in December and now it's spring. And in university, time passes. It's sort of like a lifetime in two
yes,
semesters. And so they've
totally.
been through a lot together. Let's sleep outside tonight, Clara suggested the following week. They could bring their mattress out to the balcony. We'll be able to see the stars, she said. It was the kind of March that could go either way, with crocus shoots and a chill in the breeze, but that day smelled like spring, like mud and grass, and a hint of garbage with the melted snow. Jess had walked back to the dorm in short sleeves, the sun on her arms for the first time in months, passing the frat boys up and down St. George Street who dragged their crappy couches onto the lawns. Sounds good, she said to Clara. By now, Jess had learned not to question Clara's impulses. She'd just follow along and reap the rewards. And that night, snug on the mattress under piles of blankets, Jess asked her, "Have you done something like this before?" They were lying even closer than usual to stay warm, the evening chillier since sundown, which made it more important to follow through with the plan, fond as Clara was of incongruity. If the night had been milder, she might have lost interest and headed inside. Clara said, "I mean, I've been camping, but not like this," said Jess. Not beneath the lights of the city, surrounded by its sounds, traffic, and sirens. Jess thought about how, from Clara, she'd learned how you could build your own little world. You could bring home a trunk from the sidewalk or move your bed out under the stars. Clara agreed, nope, not like this. They lay in silence for a while, and then Clara said, every time I've been close to anyone, friends, boyfriends, they've been so much older, and I don't even know why. Maybe because my sisters were teenagers when I came along. So I've been the one running behind, trying to catch up, trying to be faster, to be more. And with you, it feels like the first time ever that I don't have to do that. She added, I've never had a best friend before. Honestly, I thought I wasn't the type, which was ridiculous. Clara Summers could draw other people with the force of a magnet when she turned her attention on them. The guy who'd fixed their oven on their floor had sent her flowers. Clara could be friends with anyone if she just bothered to give them a chance, but she almost never did. So how exactly had it transpired that Jess, of all people, would finally end up here at the center of the world with Clara beside her, the entire night sky above them? What did Clara see in Jess that made her so different from everyone else that Clara never had any time for? But she couldn't ask a question like that, especially not to Clara, whose self-assurance Jess had been trying to mirror all along. Jess was scared that if she spoke at all, the spell would be broken. Because even though the usual inclination between girls she knew was always to relate, to say, oh, me too, same, same, Jess had had strings of best friends for as long as she could remember, often changing with the seasons. But her connection with Clara went deeper than any of those. It was true. She said, in all honesty, I don't know if I've ever had a real one in my life.
You know what? As I were reading that, what it made me think about was when they were probably lying there, how everything's so alive for them, and as you get into life, that doesn't happen as often anymore. Like, especially like maybe your stage or my stage, it has to be something really significant, like a move or a trip or, but at that time in your life, when you're in university, everything's kind of like vibrant, which is kind of
And
maybe,
you feel like you're at the center of things. And I think
yeah.
that's what they gave each other. They'd both sort of been on the sidelines, and then they met, and where they were was where everything was at.
Yeah. Um, okay, so let's move over and talk about some other stuff. So, tell everybody a bit about what you do. So you have a book blog, and then you're also editor of 49th Shelf. So tell everybody about both those things.
So I've had a blog for 23 years,
What? Was that even
which
a
is
thing then?
it wasn't a blog. My first blog, I didn't know that word. It was my online diary, and I was like 20, and it was ridiculous. But I really loved the idea of having a platform where I could share my many emotions at the time. And luckily it was all anonymous, so that's the greatest thing about my era. But just having a place online to put my thoughts and feelings is like a reflex for me now, because it's been more than half my life. In 2005, I went to grad school and studied creative writing in English at University of Toronto, and that's where my blog became a book blog, and it's been so ever since then, though its preoccupations are always changing. And I just still love this place to live online, and my home base online. And the great thing about blogs is they are a little bit obscure. Like, I
Mhm.
can write about complicated feelings, and I know that it's not going to blow up in my face the way it might on social media, where everyone's watching and responding, and there's buttons about what different responses can be. Blogs are still a place for nuance, I think, and where you can sort of whisper things and get some feedback, but not too much. So that place has been really important to me, and it's been huge in developing as a writer. Learning to show up every day and write small pieces of a thing is what taught me to write books. And so it was through my blog and some other writing I was doing that I became connected with 49th Shelf, which I've been working for since 2011. And it's the best job in the whole world. It's a Canadian books website. It's run by Heritage Canada and the Association of Canadian Publishers. And my job is to just be enthusiastic about Canadian books. And if you've read Canadian books, you know that that is no tall order. That's
Yeah.
just simply the best job in the world. I love it. I get to work with book publishers across Canada, indie presses, but also large presses as well. And what it has taught me about Canadian books is that there's no such thing as a kind of, even like the idea of CanLit. CanLit is everything. It's fun commercial fiction. It's beautiful, small press poetry books. It's literature from all across the country that is serious, funny, suspense. I love that you can read across genres in Canadian literature and never run out of interesting stuff. I like to think of the books we feature on 49th Shelf as being CanLit cliche defying. There are all kinds
But
of
let's
ways to.
stop there because, well, first of all, 49th it's this your that site refers to 49th parallel, which is a
Uh-huh.
reference of where Canada is. This is for international
Yes,
listeners, but also CanLit doesn't always have the greatest reputation, and that's
it
changing.
doesn't.
So can you explain a little bit about what maybe the stereotype of CanLit is versus what you're describing here, which is a broader scope?
Well, hashtag CanLit. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's there's like a small group of people will just say Margaret Atwood and Alice Munro, whose books I really love, by the way. But they're depressing books. It's about like someone who lives in a cabin in a really remote place, and they're really sad, and at some point a baby will die, and
A baby
if
will
this
die.
ends, absolutely. um it's yes, it's. And when I was becoming a novelist, I thought, okay, this is what I have to work Award. And all the books I wrote before I wrote my books that got published were books where I was trying to write in that like serious literary canlit voice. I was trying to be something else. And it was really liberating for me as a writer when I was like, oh, I can write in my own voice. And I found out what that voice is. And you know, that is Canadian books too.
Okay, so now this is the fun part where I asked Kerry because it's holiday time to come up with some recommendations for holiday books. And so she came back. Not only did she come back with 5 books, but they have funny little um, kind of categories. So could you get into that and tell people what you're recommending for this holiday
Yes.
season?
So these are all Canadian books, and you'll see that, yeah, it takes all sorts. So my first one is for the historical fiction fan. And this is a book called Gin, Turpentine, Penny Royal Rue by Christine Higdon. It's not the easiest title to remember, but oh my gosh, the book is good. It's a book that has everything. There's really rich, wonderful prose, there's family drama, there's smugglers, speakeasies, and a literary dog, possibly the best literary dog I've ever encountered. And it's just really steeped in 1920s Vancouver. And they seem to have really divergent experiences on the surface. So one of them is pregnant, another one has an illegal abortion and gets very, very injured, almost dies. The third has fallen in love with a woman, and the fourth is struggling with infertility. And the whole point of the book, apart from all the action and adventure and smuggling, is that these experiences are not divergent at all. They are so connected to issues of female autonomy and choice. And it's a very contemporary book, really, in terms of the issues it considers, but it's just also a fantastic read.
Okay. That sounds really interesting. So, so it's set, you said set in 1920s Vancouver or what?
That's right. So it has
Okay.
sort of a jazz age vibe and flapper dresses. And it's
Mm.
I read it when I was camping 2 days in the woods, and it was just the perfect companion.
And then what about the next one?
So I also love detective fiction.
Too.
And this book is not brand new. It came out earlier this year. It's called Blackwater Falls by Ozma Zehanat Khan. But the second book in the series is called Blood Betrayal, and it just came out at the end of November. So police procedurals post 2020 and Black Lives Matter are kind of fraught. What does it mean to be reading detective fiction now? Khan has a PhD in international human rights law, and she has clearly been thinking about this. Her fictional detective, who's a Muslim woman in Colorado, she understands that police forces sometimes, often, are failing to serve or protect racialized communities. This is a book about white supremacy, police brutality, border policy, refugee struggles, even inhumane working conditions in meatpacking plants, which has been such a problem since COVID-19. It's led to so many deaths. It sounds like this is a book just based on issues and headlines, but it is not, because the story shows that these are all issues that are interconnected, and they impact communities and people so much. The stakes in the novel and reality are huge. So this Muslim detective is new in town, and she has to grapple with the deaths of Muslim girls in the community. And she finds in her own police force, she doesn't get the care and concern that she knows the issue deserves. She's also dealing with PTSD herself. It's a great detective novel, but it also just is taking on the issues of our time, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay, the next one is fun. What category is this?
This is for my friend who always has the best manicures. I never get my nails done, but I still loved Sunshine Nails by May Nguyen. It's a story that's inspired by her own parents' story as Vietnamese immigrants who run a nail salon in Halifax. Although the book is set in Toronto, it has You've Got Mail vibes. What's going to
Mm.
happen when the humble family nail salon gets a new neighbor? It's corporate mega salon down the road. The Tran family has to fight to save their family business, but the shenanigans and escapades involved in that threaten to tear their family apart. It's a very funny book about a Vietnamese Canadian family, which is a perspective that I don't think I'd read before. It's also heartwarming. It's a great family story. It's a little bit silly, but also really rich and yeah, a lot of fun. It has the most gorgeous, sparkly yellow cover too, as you would expect from a book about nails.
So an intelligent, fluffy book, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
So that's the best. That's a sweet spot. That's kind of hard to find.
Yeah.
What about the
Uh,
next one?
so the next one is sort of set in a similar universe to my book. It's called The Damages by Genevieve Scott. It takes on the toxicity of 1990s culture. It's set in a fictionalized version of Queen's University during an actual devastating ice storm that happened in 1998 that took down power for weeks. It devastated a lot of Eastern North America. So the narrator is Roz. She's trying to fit in during her first year at university, and she really wants to distance herself from her extremely uncool roommate. But then the roommate goes missing during the storm. In the chaos and upheaval, everyone around her declares Roz responsible for what happened to the roommate, and she ends up dropping out of school. The novel has a second storyline that takes place in 2020 as Roz begins to reckon with her culpability in what happened years before and the possibility that she was a victim too. As with the best books that are inspired by Me Too, this book is not firmly coming down on one side or another. It doesn't come to neat conclusions. It engages with the mess of it all, and it teases out all these threads. It asks questions instead of giving us answers. It also, though, just really much was a book of my time, and I recognized that time, and it was wonderful to read it again. So this would be the book that I would give my best friend from 1998.
And what's the final book?
So this book, my dad's getting it, so I hope he doesn't listen to this. It's for the history buff. This is nonfiction. It's called Clara at the Door with a Revolver by Carolyn Witzman. It was a finalist for the Toronto Book Awards. It's the story of a Black woman who dressed in men's clothing in 1890s Toronto.
Wow.
And she managed to get a jury, which was an all-white jury, male, obviously, to acquit her of the murder of a young man who was shot dead in the darkness of night. Like, what are the odds of that happening? It reads like the most terrific suspense novel. I read it right after I got a COVID booster, and I just was lazy and spent the whole day in bed, unable to put it down. It's also really rich with historical detail about what life was like for Black communities in 1890s Toronto, about the city's newspaper scene. There were 7 daily newspapers in Toronto in the 1890s. I also learned that boathouses were notorious scenes of carnal activity. It's full of like really fascinating. Who knew, right? Boathouses. It was really fresh, engaging, and vivid, but also really relevant for, it tells us a lot about where we are now and how much hasn't changed. So it was like the very best suspense novel, but you're reading about history, and it was terrific.
Now, do we have to read the book to find out, did she do it or not? Or do I have to read the book to know?
I think you need to read the book.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not the question on which it hinges really, but the author, I saw the author speak before I bought the book, and she was just such a fascinating presenter. I knew she'd be the best storyteller, and I was correct.
Okay, so I wanted to end. I was just thinking about, because you're so experienced with book reviewing, do you have any pro tips? Like, what's like a really important thing to know when you're reviewing a book? And then what's something that's a mistake that I should avoid?
The mistake that I really had to get over earlier in my book career, and that was hard to do, was thinking I had an obligation to review books that I wasn't that interested in, or to, really be generous toward them because they had been given to me or sent to me. And I thought, well, I owe something to the publisher or writer who sent me this. And, I think giving the book a chance at all and reading it and thinking about it is what I owe the writer. But taking the time to give my opinion is that it's unpaid work. So yeah, I judged books more generously than perhaps I should have back in the day. It took me a while to feel confident enough to have my own point of view, and to know when a book wasn't for me. The other thing is to sort of pursue your own avenues, and this is not for professional book reviewers so much. It's hard out there for professional book reviewers. The opportunities are really sparse, and so a lot of us are reviewing in our own spaces and not being paid for it. And I think in order to make that work rewarding and to make the spaces where we're writing more interesting, pursue your own curious avenues. Read older books, read books that aren't what everyone's reading. I mean, maybe it's not going to bring you huge audiences, but you're contributing something meaningful. You are interested in the work you're doing, and the reward is the thinking and processing you're doing as you write these pieces. Don't be afraid to be original. I think it's good for everybody when that works out.
Well, that's fantastic. Okay, so thank you so much, Kerry. Now we're all set up. We've learned about your new book, so people can go check that out, and we know what to get for the holidays for maybe our best friend.
Absolutely. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.